Hello and welcome to another edition of The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 12th of July, Marching Day 2024. Sarah, have you got your sash out? Have you got it ironed? Are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm always ready. I'm always ready to march.
Yeah. Well, you know me, I'm a West Brit. I'm only sad I'm so far from the border. Anyway, I'm back in the country after my holidays. I was away for the last couple of weeks, so I'm glad to say normal service has resumed. And for those regular listeners who might have heard a couple of weeks ago that we said this podcast was going to go to video, that will be happening next week. So this is the last audio only John and Sarah podcast. From next week, you can all be horrified by the sight of us. You looking forward to it, Sarah?
Can't wait. No more secret pseudo cream face.
Anyway, yeah, so I was in Ukraine during the week and fascinating country.
Tell me, is it lovely?
Well, you can see why people fight over it. Particularly, I imagine farmers have been fighting over it for years because the land is magnificent. I saw white storks, which was a real highlight for me because, you know, they're kind of a culturally relative bird and everyone knows them, but you don't see them in Ireland or really Western Europe, and they're magnificent. But yeah, I was really struck. I was really struck by, you know, when you're in a country that's at war, which I've never been before, during a war, it really is quite an eerie feeling. I mean, most Ukrainians, it should be said, are just getting on with life as normal, as you might expect them to. But you're there constantly, and you know, I mean, 3 or 4 air raid sirens went off when we were there, and you saw people running off the streets just in case Lviv, the city where we were, was going to be hit. You see people walking around, see some of the walking wounded. Like it's a strange place to be. It kind of feels you're constantly aware that this event is happening in the country, even though you feel pretty safe where you are. So yeah, it was definitely worth going. I'm very glad I went. It was interesting to experience it, but I would say it's a strange feeling. I mean, the Ukrainians, at least the ones I was talking to, are in this for the long haul. There is a virulent hatred of the Russians amongst not a lot of Ukrainians that speak English, but those who could talk. I mean, there was, I didn't meet anyone who wasn't 100% convinced of the need for final victory, put it that way.
Wow. So you were there at a wedding, correct?
I was there at a wedding. It was innocent enough. Now, that didn't stop people speculating online that I was there for all sorts of nefarious reasons, of course.
Speaking of storks.
Yes. You were particularly amused by the person who thought I was going to adopt another child.
They said you were there to collect another child. And I was furious. If you had children I didn't know about, I'd be devo.
Yeah, the only child I have is a Cocker Spaniel. And she's poorly enough behaved. So no, I was not there to adopt a child. I was not there to engage in surrogacy. I was not there on behalf of NATO, as somebody said. I was not there, at the invitation of the Rothschilds, as somebody else said. I mean, I think there's a whole discussion to be had about how crazy certain sections of the internet are becoming. And the way people can't take anything at face value. I was there because one of my oldest and dearest friends was getting married to a Ukrainian lady, and they had to hold the wedding in Ukraine. And I'm so glad I went. And it was a wonderful event. And I won't name the happy couple; they know who they are. But we're so grateful that we had the chance to go.
I think
so. What was happening at home when I was away?
I think there's also a conversation to be had about how John McGurk lives rent free in some people's heads. Seriously. What happened while you were away? Lots of things. Nothing. There was a poll earlier in the week. Sinn Féin are continuing their decline, which I think is probably scaring the bejesus out of people who care about what happens to Sinn Féin. Normally in the past, I would say that they've been quite good at, stopping the bleeding. But it doesn't look like that's happening so far. Now, it's obviously early days and everything, but I think that they're probably very, very, very concerned.
Well, at the same time as they're sliding, Fine Gael is hitting new heights. I mean, I saw they were on 24% in that opinion poll. And I mean, I just think in Simon Harris, and before I say what I'm going to say, I want to reiterate, I do not endorse Simon Harris. I do not think he's a great leader or anything like that, but I think he's a very good politician. And he is just running rings around Mary Lou. I mean, Mary Lou thought this week with the lady who's stuck in Dubai in those awful circumstances that she had an opportunity to pound the government, and then Simon Harris jumped on that issue, and within a couple of hours the young woman was coming home and Simon Harris was tweeting to the world that he'd phoned her and phoned the mother. And just took an issue that Sinn Féin brought onto the agenda thinking they could get some purchase out of it, made it entirely his own. I mean, obviously, first of all, there's a young woman at the centre of that case who it's a good thing what the government did. But I just, if you contrast that with how long it sometimes took the Varadkar government to move, I can't remember the guy's name, but remember there was an Irish man stuck in China at length, and heaven and earth had to be moved.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for years.
And whereas the contrast here, I think, shows that Simon Harris knows how to act and act quickly, which is their support is going up and Fine Gael's support is going down, and it kind of feels to me like that momentum is becoming inexorable and going to be very hard to shift. Barring some kind of scandal, and you never know where a scandal might come from, but barring some kind of scandal, I think Sinn Féin are beginning to enter we're in real trouble territory. I was struck by the UK election that the voters kind of stopped listening to the Conservatives.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we're getting into the territory where a lot of voters who were flirting with Sinn Féin a year ago have now just stopped listening to them altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think we talked about it during the local and European elections where I said that there's no one who hates you like someone who loved you, but there's a rage there. It's not a disappointment. It's not and maybe winning back that vote is going to be extremely difficult. But in saying that, Sinn Féin fight them on the beaches. They go to they go into doors, they knock door to door. They really go back to their voters. They don't put out press releases and hope that it hits home with people. They go and meet them. And so there's no better party than them to actually try and grasp some of this back. But I think that I think I certainly underestimated Simon Harris as a politician. I think he's hard to outsmart and outfox. And I think that whereas I credit where credit's due, I would give Mary Lou some credit most of the time. I don't think she's a bad politician. She's a good speaker. I think she's outfoxed on this one. And I think as well, in politics, I've seen it happen so many times. You get kicked, you're knocked down to the ground. It's hard to get back up. And there's a momentum behind Fine Gael now that is hard to see, as you say, how it stops. There's a group
but in some ways,
cohort of people who are really angry with the government. Okay, but I was speaking about this to somebody the other day, and I was saying it's like this, right? A huge percentage of the people. Let's just take Dublin, and let's take a constituency that doesn't have a Fine Gael seat, but has an IPAS centre being set up there that has, low socioeconomic, so disproportionately affected by cost of living, etc. On these numbers, if things continue, Fine Gael look like they're going to get 2 seats in somewhere like Dunleary. So why do they give a shit about getting a seat somewhere else when they didn't have one already? They'll hold their own without the working classes who don't want to talk to them, who have now turned away from Sinn Féin and somewhere else. Fine Gael don't need to win that vote back. Their stabilitarian vote is holding up. So they're fine.
Yeah. No, you're completely correct. But at the same time, I mean, it's an objectively extraordinary state of affairs. I mean, I look at the country and I see an indictment of the opposition, because I mean, just this week alone, and I wasn't even in the country, so I wasn't following the news that closely. Well, we 2 Irishmen ended up in the canal and drowned. We have a guy who had 10,000 images of child pornography walked free from prison, and we had Fiffall putting out a tweet this week. Did you see this one? They put out a tweet saying, "We have conducted a survey of central Dublin and we've discovered that 70% of people are afflicted by antisocial behaviour and lawlessness, and we are calling on the government to do something about it." We're calling on the government. The Fianna Fáil are calling on the government to do something about it. And in this environment, the government are cruising to re-election, which is, I mean, in some ways it's a just result, because if you're the opposition and you can't beat that, you're probably not going to be a very good government to begin with. But anyway.
That's true. 1,500 people they interviewed people to establish that people didn't find this city safe. I mean,
But then calling on the government to do something
I
about
know.
it, that just took the cake.
I know. Great.
That just took the cake.
Great. Like, why not? Why not? Call on the government call on the government for whatever you fancy.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
I want to focus a little bit though on this guy with the 10,000 images, because something strikes me with all this, which is that, you know, when you watch these cases where people go into court with sort of child sex abuse images, which is the politically correct term now for what we used to call child pornography.
Yeah.
Generally, the excuses are kind of the same, right? It's I lost my job, I was depressed, I was in a bad place in my life, I got drunk one night and I went wandering on the computer and I ended up in a bad place on the internet, and this is totally out of character. Now, I don't buy that for a moment, because I don't think any of those circumstances make you sexually attracted to children, but it's at least kind of plausible.
We've discussed this before. Have you ever stumbled upon child porn by accident? No.
No. You haven't.
I don't know where it is. I think you definitely have to go looking for it.
Yeah, you do. But even that, I mean, you can kind of, I don't really buy it, but you can see why a jury or a court or the public might believe of somebody they had one bad moment and they ended up with 20 or 30 images on their computer. But if you have 10,000 images of child sex abuse on your computer, you are a hardened connoisseur of that material. Like, your sexual orientation is very clearly established and pointing in that direction. This isn't a freak thing. And for you to walk free of prison is, I mean, I'm writing a piece that'll be, I'm writing my weekly roundup piece for tomorrow. I say that, you know, we've actually taken this paedophile who had his 10,000 images that were presumably keeping him occupied, taken the images off him and let him back on the street. Like, if anything, that to me makes the situation worse.
Yeah, and like, does anybody honestly believe that he's going to go, lesson learned, I won't do that anymore? Because if you've got 10,000, like, that's your sexual orientation. That's what you're into. So unless you're chemically castrated, I don't see a situation where you're suddenly going to go, I'm not really into that anymore. I think I'll be into women over the age of 25 from now on.
Yeah. Over the age of 21 would do. I mean, we take that, wouldn't we? But I mean, like, it's just bizarre to me. And I mean, we've got the same situation. This isn't just a thing, obviously, in Ireland. We've got the same situation in the UK now, where I think Keir Starmer's first act as Prime Minister is to release 100,000 prisoners from British jails on the grounds that prisons are too full. Ed West, and if listeners want to read probably the most intelligent right-wing commentator in the world today, they should look up this guy, Ed West. But he writes on the Substack, and he did a piece this week where he just went through all the people in Britain who've been murdered or had their lives altered by people out on temporary release or people who had suspended sentences. And I'd love for somebody to do a similar exercise in Ireland, because it's extraordinary the number of people who are committing crimes, having already had 70 or 80 previous convictions, have already been sentenced to prison, and have been let out for good behaviour. And it doesn't seem to affect their future sentencing at all.
Yeah. There's some, I've read analysis of it, similar type analysis in America. And I mean, obviously, if your daughter is murdered by somebody, it's horrific in and of itself. But if your daughter is murdered by somebody who's on release, it's just so much worse. Because, you know, ultimately, the duty of the justice system, or one of them, is to protect people. And if you're, you know, it's like Aisling Murphy's boyfriend when he did the victim impact statement. Like, you're going out, you're working, you're living your life. You have a reasonable expectation that the state is providing you with as much safety as is, insofar as is possible. And releasing people because you haven't bothered to increase the amount of prison spaces isn't providing safety for people. And if your daughter or somebody's daughter is murdered because of that, you'd be, I mean, obviously just extra angry. It's just, it's not keeping up the end of the social contract that the government should.
Yeah, and yet I kind of feel like, I don't know what it is. It's kind of, do you feel like there's a kind of a numbness in society to this? I mean, because I kind of feel like you and I spend so much time talking about it, and it's sort of the fundamental duty of a state, right, is to keep the people in the state safe. That's why we have states. That's why we have nations. That's why we formed first into tribes, then into provinces, then into countries, was because of collective security. And the idea of having, the whole reason for having to subject yourself to the rule of law is to keep other people safe and to keep you safe in return. And yet I kind of feel like there's across Western society, there's a whole section of people to whom this just no longer applies, and the rest of us are expected to live with the consequences of that. And no one seems to be even remotely angry about it. Or is there a deep anger out there that's not getting a voice? I mean, I see this week that the lady attacked by Cathal Crotty is now saying she might run for office on the back of her successful campaign to raise her profile and the profile of her case. But she doesn't even seem to be running for office on the desire to impose more sentences. It seems to be more a generic "I am woman, hear me roar" left wing stance that she's taking, rather than actually doing anything or promising anything to address the problem that she came to prominence to address in the first place.
She won't run, and if she does, she won't get elected, and it's just a kind of a nonsense thing. But yeah, I mean, like, take her, put her to side for a second. I think that I don't know. I mean, I think those local and European elections changed my mind a bit about what is and isn't at the forefront of people's minds, because you couldn't argue with the fact that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil did very well, and all you heard was about people's anger about this, that, and the other, but it didn't show up, not in any great number. So, is it that people are threw them a lifeline for the local and European elections, were biding their time to see how Simon Harris gets on, or is crime one of those things that the majority of people, quite kind of like hospitals, they don't really think about it until it's personally affecting them?
Yeah, I think it might be the latter. I mean, what we say for listeners, I think Sarah and I often talk about this. It's that, people say they're concerned about the health service, but how many of us ever use it? I mean, you hear about somebody on a trolley for 26 hours and you think, God, that's terrible, that's a disgrace. But you don't really get viscerally angry about it until it's your own mother that's lying there for 76 hours in a trolley. And there might be an element of that when it comes to, I think housing is another great example of that. Like, something like 70% of people say they're concerned about housing, but that can't be true. There's an element of people just saying they're concerned about the thing because they think it's the thing to say, where in actual fact they live in their own homes and they're perfectly content with the price of their house going up.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, like, that there's a lot of people in Ireland who are doing okay, stabilitarians. The status, the way things are working is working for them. If they have a house and they have a job, they could do with a bit more money in their pocket, but ultimately they're fine. So until they go into town and get their head kicked in or whatever, they don't really think about this as an issue. Now, I think that, and also a lot of people, I'm sure you'd agree that, like, if you're over a certain age, you kind of go into town, you might go for dinner, you're not really on the street at 4:00 in the morning, when's the last time you were on the street at 4:00 in the morning? Like, and I used to be out going to nightclubs and, like, on O'Connell Street at 3 and 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning for years, or Grafton Street or wherever it was. I couldn't tell you the last time that not that I didn't go out, but if I go out, I go for dinner, I go for a drink and I go home. Like, you know what I mean? So, like, maybe people just don't see it.
I mean, I think they see it in the media, but they probably don't feel it. I mean, it's very hard to say because, I mean, all the statistics show crime is a problem. We have one of the parties of government calling on the government to do something about it. We have these high-profile cases that seem to anger people, and yet we have the bizarre situation where the government is on course for, at this point, you'd have to say what's looking to be a relatively comfortable re-election, at least for the two biggest parties within it, maybe with a change of coalition partner. So, I mean, you and I had this recurring theme in the podcast, I mean, before the referendums, where we were saying, look, I get the sense that the referendum is going to be defeated, and we were right. And then ahead of the European elections and local elections, I don't think we were as on the money. And I have to say, coming up to the general election, which is going to happen at some point in the next eight months, I just have no sense for what's going to happen. But I don't get a feeling of a massive desire to change the government amongst ordinary people, which surprises me.
Well, if you pick it apart, I mean, I don't think we weren't on the money. I mean, if you really look at the
local... We weren't as on the money.
No, we were right about Sinn Féin. And then if you look at Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil had their worst local election, I think, ever. They both kind of held their own in terms of their seats. But it wasn't it was a surprising result, but it wasn't a kind of a landslide or anything like it. I think you're right, though. I think, like, normally I pick things up, I have different groups of friends, and I'm just hearing nothing at the moment. Now, it is July and we're just out of a local European election cycle. And I think people are just like bored of it and don't, haven't checked into it, haven't thought about it, and are kind of sick of the lot of everyone. So, it's hard to pick up anything. But like I said on the podcast before, I think that the defining issue of that election hasn't happened yet. And, so you talked about this poor men who fell into the canal or whatever. We don't know what happened, do we?
No.
So
Gardaí say they're investigating all the circumstances, but they haven't issued any further update. There's been no indication that they're investigating an act of foul play, but they haven't ruled that out either.
okay, so when that first happened, when I first heard that, I thought, this kind of thing, what happened here? I still think that the event that could determine the election or the course of the election hasn't happened yet. And I think it could, and I feel in my bones like it will be a law and order justice event. Because I
mean,
there's a pot there that
we haven't talked about it. Yeah, we haven't talked about immigration in a while either on the podcast, and it kind of feels like, I don't know whether there's been a conscious effort in the media to tamp down discussion on immigration and hope that talking about anything else will make it go away, or whether it's been a little bit of the government's kind of, we're getting more muscular on migration rhetoric. But it kind of feels like there's been a slight simmering down of kind of the widespread public outrage on that topic for the moment as well, which is interesting. And I'm sure there are people who are listening to this who are saying, John, I'm mad as hell. I'm still mad as hell. And what are you saying? Yeah. And respect to you. I mean, you're mad as hell. I think you're right to be. I'm not saying you're wrong to be mad as hell. I'm just saying that I think there are an awful lot of people who were angrier about this in the spring than they are now. Maybe it's because it's summer. Maybe it's because people are going on holidays. But it feels to me, Sarah, and maybe I don't know if you're picking this up, that issue has kind of gone down to a simmer from the boiling point it was at, say, in February or March.
But is that a symptom of the fact that in February, March, April, May, because the local European elections were coming up, they had to discuss it because there was candidates like Niall Boylan who were bringing it up despite the fact that they didn't want to talk about it, and they had to. And now it's not that it's simmered down; it's just gone back to business as usual, where there's an element where we all pretend it's not happening. Yeah,
I mean, I know there's a protest coming up at the weekend, I think. And they can, Councillor Malky Steenson can shoot me if I get this wrong, but I thought I saw him tweeting that there was a protest on Saturday of this weekend about that. But I mean, those are the same people protesting who've been protesting all along. There's no sense of it building into like a broader movement at the moment. So it's kind of, at best, it's kind of standing still as an issue. And I suppose people might be giving the government a chance between now and the election to see what they'll do about it, but it doesn't look like they're going to do much. So we'll see. Anyway, you mentioned Niall Boylan there, which brings me nicely to the saga of Independent Ireland, because I think they were targeting me this week when they said that they described fringe commentators on the internet writing articles that were, wild and mad stuff because I criticised them for Kieran Malouly's decision to join the European Democrats in the European Parliament. So what do we make of that?
Well, I wouldn't describe you as a fringe commentator, my darling. But I read that press release and...
Did you sit down? Because it went on for about... I'm a pretty good reader, but it was at least 20 minutes of my life just to get to the middle of it.
I mean, I've seen more coherent things written on asylum walls and excrement, frankly. No. Well, it's just, if you're doing a press release, it shouldn't be over 2,000 words, Don. Come on.
It shouldn't be over 500, ideally, unless there's a lot of technical detail in it.
So I think what you're looking at here is well, first of all, go back to last Sunday. Elaine Mullally, who I tweeted about, I obviously had a lot of dealings with Elaine Mullally in my work with Niall, and a nicer, more competent, more like of high integrity lady you couldn't meet. I mean, honest to God, such a fan. And
yeah, for the avoidance of doubt, I don't know Elaine Mullally at all. I think I was on one Twitter space with her before the election, and she seemed very nice. But I've never met her. But by reputation, certainly, and she's very capable,
very highly regarded by everyone who meets her. And I think that her leaving is a big body blow for Independent Ireland, and I'm sure they I'm sure they have a lot of regret about that. Now, I'm not like privy to the information about what's happening behind the scenes. So they could have begged her to stay, or they could have asked her to leave. I don't know, but I think that was a big blow. And then I think one of the problems that they ran into is that if you're going to release a press release and explain your position, why did you wait over a week? Was it to say anything? And like I consider myself to be quite fair, and I think that if Niall Boylan had gotten elected, Niall Boylan would have joined the ECR, and then Ciara Maloney would have joined Renew or whatever. And then Independent Ireland would have been able to say, well, look, we're a broad church and like we don't have a whip, so this is the way it goes. But that's not what happened. And I think that what you're looking at is a real demonstration of the lack of, like political or PR kind of experience behind the scenes there. It's 2,500 word or more press release a week after the event. People publicly leaving the party who are like the chairman of the party, and you say nothing. Like, it's not, that's like, I can understand how, Ciara Maloney is not subject to a whip and the party's put in a difficult position, but this isn't the way you treat your voters. This isn't the way you treat people who supported you. You come out and say, listen, he's done this is our views or whatever it is. And they didn't. And I think that's a massive mistake. And I think a lot of their voters and a lot of their supporters online, you can see the comments, they're horrendous, are very, very angry. And, they're entitled to be. That's the way they feel about it. And I think that it's completely naive and absurd of Independent Ireland to think that any news outlet, but like in your case, Gript, isn't going to talk or comment about the fact that this is happening. And when they leave it open for a week of no comment, no press release, no nothing, that people aren't going to say anything, that people are just going to go, we'll just leave them to it. That's not the way politics works. Like, not to lose the old cliche, like, you're playing senior hurling now, guys.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I'm going to express a personal opinion here. So this is just what I think, but I think it is the most catastrophically stupid decision I've seen a political party make in years. If you think about who the voters for Independent Ireland are, they are people who are disillusioned by and large with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. There are people who maybe were Bertie Ahern voters circa 2002, 2007, who have fallen out of love with those two big parties and have moved over to something that is more kind of in that gene pool, but they felt more true to the kind of historic roots of those parties.
Yeah.
More conservative, more in touch with rural Ireland, more logical. Now, if you and I are having conversations, Sarah, about where Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have gone so wrong and why they got into the mess that they were, I mean, and we've just said they may be recovering ahead of the elections, but why they're by and large both down from their sort of 40%, 27% peaks respectively.
Yeah.
It's because they ignored who their voters were.
Yeah.
They started pandering to people who would never ever vote for them. And it feels to me with Independent Ireland that they're trying to say, on the one hand, that this thing about them joining the European Democrats is completely overblown because voters don't care about it and it doesn't bind us into being socially liberal. And, this is just culture war nonsense and we're going to be common sense, blah, blah, blah. And why do you worry about it? Voters don't care. But your base does care. The people who switch to support you, they do care. And this is like, for me, it's like doing politics backwards. If the voters don't care about something and your base does care, then you do the thing that your base cares about and you join a political party in the European Parliament that reflects your values. And what they have just done is sent a massive signal to anyone who voted for them because they're alienated with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. They've sent a massive signal to say, we are just like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Because when it comes to choosing between you and choosing between what the Irish Times will say about us or what Labour Party TDs in the Dáil will think about us, we're going to stick with the establishment. So I think that's why I think it's just a catastrophic error. It fundamentally takes a knife and sticks it in the heart of their brand. That's my analysis of it in terms of the voters they wanted to represent. And that's not to say Michael Collins is going to lose a seat. Obviously he's not. But he was never elected as an Independent Ireland TD to begin with.
Yeah.
But it is to say that I think they'll have real difficulty coming back from this and building an activist base that they had real momentum to build for up until now.
Yeah, and I think that that's a real shame because I think there was huge potential there. I mean, I think Michael Collins is a competent guy. I think Richard I don't know who is also a very competent guy. There was a lot of heart there. There was a lot of, there was a lot of potential there. And Michael Fitzmaurice, obviously another really competent TD, could have, look, let's wait and see what happens. But I think that, you said in an article that you wrote about Elaine Mullally that a party is as good as the people who are behind the scenes. And I think that what you can have 3 really competent, really good TDs, but what you're seeing now is evidence, especially with Elaine gone, that they don't have any political heads in the background. They don't have any person who's in charge, who's got competence to manage this properly. And that's a big problem for them.
Well, a political party that puts out a 2,500 word statement doesn't have good people working for it.
Yeah.
That's just the bottom line. I mean, you don't do that. You keep your message tight, you keep it sharp, you make sure everyone can understand it. You don't put out a big rambling long statement that anyone can pull apart, first of all, because of the contradictions and the falsehoods within it. I mean, there was a bit in it where they said, we joined Renew, which is the group they're signing up for, because it's bigger than the ECR. I mean, that's just wrong. The ECR, which was the other group they were talking about, is actually bigger by, I think, 1 MEP.
Yeah.
So where do you think they go from here, though, if they are to win back the sort of trust of the people, many of whom are our listeners, who they've lost? I mean, is it a complete write-off, or are there still chances for them?
No, I mean, I think that they need to make some structural changes fast in how they manage stuff like this. I think that there's a few councillors that they got elected that are really talented and got really, really good votes. I think they should focus on the general election with a suite of very, very, very clear policies. But I think what's going to happen is that they're going to be chased around that election campaign, being asked about whether or not they're going in with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And, if they are or they aren't, that's their decision, obviously, but they have to be clear on it, because they've broken down trust with voters, and I think it's going to damage them. And I think it's going to be used by the likes of Sinn Féin and other independents as a stick to beat them with between here and polling day for the general election. And they need to come up with a message, and a strong message at that, about how to deal with that. And then they need to come up with a policy platform on key policy areas that they care about, and be absolutely crystal clear on where they stand on them, and where they would stand on them if they were to go into government. Because, I mean, there's a lot of their voters who I'm sure are listening to this who would say, well, I don't want them to ever go into power with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But people need to also be realistic. What Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael at current polling are going to be making up the next general election. So the only hope to get your policies in any way even considered is to go into government with them. Now, I'm not saying that that's would be my choice, but that's something that's definitely going to have to be addressed. And I think, if Niall got elected, or this ECR thing hadn't happened, I think they could have sort of stayed on the fence a little bit longer. And I think this has just put them really into the spotlight now, and they're going to have to answer hard questions on what their long-term and short-term plans are.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that strike me here. I mean, the first is, I read a message from a guy during the week who had actually been heavily involved in their campaign. And he texted me along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing now, but he said, "I'm distraught. This is the first time I ever got involved in politics. I thought, there was a real chance to build something here. And I feel like I've not only wasted my time, but been deceived, and been consciously deceived at that, about what the values of this movement were." You might say that guy is being dramatic.
Yeah.
But people feel like that, especially when they've poured their heart and soul into something, and then they find that it's not what they think it is. And I'll give you an example of that, because I am the editor of Gript Media, and I get emails every week from people who email in anger because we've said something that they would fundamentally disagree with, and they no longer necessarily feel they can subscribe to us or support us or their faith is shaken because they've read one opinion they disagree with. People take things very personally, especially when they feel a kind of ownership of it. And I'm proud to say a lot of Gript readers do kind of feel an ownership of the platform. And, you know, I always write back to those people and go, look, we can't agree with you all the time, but I'm sorry you feel that way. But ultimately, you know, we can't agree all the time. But I think a political party in a situation like this where people feel very betrayed, I think it has an obligation, first of all, to say sorry to those people who feel betrayed and admit that it got it wrong. Because otherwise they're just going to believe that you're going to get it wrong again in the future and again in the future and again in the future. I think it'd be much easier to sell them on going into government with Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil than it would be for signing up in the European Parliament, as they have done, with people who want to impose hate speech laws, abortion up until birth, and a militarized EU on the European Union, which is what their parliamentary group want to do. I mean, that's a fundamental reversal of the values people thought you had for right or wrong.
Yeah, I mean, again, that comes down to the way you manage it and how you speak to people and how you go forward from here. And I think that, you know, there's obviously potential to turn it around if you have the right attitude to it. But I think calling people keyboard warriors who disagree with you and kind of being so dismissive and worse, not saying anything for over a week is a massive, catastrophic mistake. And anybody who, you know, thought that was a good idea really needs to have a word with themselves.
Mm-hmm. They should hire somebody competent. Know any volunteers?
No.
Okay. I was kidding. All right. Somebody else who's having a bad political week, probably on a bigger scale than Independent Ireland, is our friend Uncle Joe Biden, the hero of Castlebar or wherever it was that he spoke a year or two ago. He probably doesn't remember, Sarah, that he was there. But he got a great reception when he came to Ireland, and it now looks like he may not be with us for very much longer. What's your read on all of that?
Well, first of all, this reminds me that a couple of weeks ago I said in the podcast when I was talking about him, I said, I'm sure he's a nice man. And people were rinsing me in the comments, being like, he's not a nice man. Okay, I was just saying it because I felt sorry for him because he's clearly lost his mind. Okay, it's not my analysis of his policy positions on anything. Okay, so I was just saying it because, like, you know, this is just tough to watch.
Don't speak ill of the nearly dead.
Yeah, and all that. I think that the Democrats are circling him like about to peck him to death, or pick his carcass like vultures. George Clooney doing an op-ed piece this week where he admits that he was at an event with him a while ago where he was the same kind of confused, incoherent person that he was at the debate. I think that's really significant because I think George Clooney is more of a player for the Democrats in terms of their public image than they would probably publicly admit. And then I think senators, there's just a drip, drip, drip. Nancy Pelosi, you know, this is an orchestrated attempt to get rid of. And I don't.
Yeah,
he won't be the candidate. That's what I think.
In chicken farms, large chicken farms where the chickens grow up in a shed, at least for the first few weeks of their lives, the things that they drink out of are red, right? Because chickens instinctively peck at things that are red. Which is good for getting them to drink, but it also means that if there's any chick at all in that flock that has a cut or a weakness, the other chicks will peck it to death, and that is the leading cause of mortality amongst chicks. There's a bit of information from somebody who grew up on a chicken farm, and it kind of feels like the Democratic Party is a bunch of chickens who see a little bit of red on Joe Biden. But I just don't know if it'll be as easy to get rid of him as they say it will. I mean, this guy is the president of the United States. He is the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party. He has thousands of delegates who are pledged to vote for him at the convention. And he has said several times this week, I'm staying in the race. I'm not getting out. If you want to damage me, on your own heads be it. And at some point, it strikes me that there's every chance all these Democrats who are now saying we don't think he's fit to be president are going to have to climb down and say, well, actually, he's the best candidate, and we back him. And if you don't believe me on that, just look at the fact that, on the other side of the aisle, there have been much more embarrassing retreats. I mean, you had people like Marco Rubio who said all sorts of things about Donald Trump including that he was clinically insane, who are now endorsing him to the hilt. So, I mean, politicians are more than capable of climbing down from that tree if it becomes necessary and pretending that they didn't say all the terrible things they said for months about the guy they now wanting to be president. So I don't know if they're going to force him off the ticket, because I think it'd be very difficult to do it practically if he doesn't want to go by himself. And I think if you know, there will come a point at some point in the next couple of weeks where it will click with them that they're either going to get him off or they're not. And if they decide they're not, they're going to have to walk all these statements back, and that's going to be very funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem becomes, though, that even your most idealistic, romantic person looking at him who thinks he's still able to do the job can't possibly think he's going to be well able to do that job 4 years from now. You know, so
yeah, that's
like, even if he's okay, and I don't think he is, but even if he's somewhat coherent, provided he gets his sleep and provided he does this and provided he does that, the things we're talking about don't work that way. They don't. They're degenerative. You know, you don't just get better.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, and that is the biggest single problem. That's why it's a fatal flaw for his candidacy, because you don't start recovering mental function at that age. Everyone we all know it's only going in one direction. But at the same time, there's an opinion poll out today. The ABC Washington Post opinion poll has the election race tied at 46% between Trump and Biden, and that's after these couple of weeks. And I mean, to be fair, I think that's the best poll for Biden, but there's no poll that has him losing nationally by more than 3 or 4 at this stage. Now, the problem is, because the way the electoral college is structured, that's not good enough, but even a tie isn't good enough. But it's not as if Trump is flattening him in the opinion polls either.
Not yet, but we've still a ways to go. There's still another debate. There'll be other things. There'll be, you know, there's now a kind of a razor focus on his mental capacity. You know, if you think about that, even for the most sharp person who's not in any cognitive difficulty, you know, if I thought that somebody was watching me right now looking for evidence of, you know, my mental focus being wrong, you know, even that in of itself for a person who's fine is difficult. And the campaign, which is the American presidential campaign, is notoriously one of the most physically grueling, tiring. You're flying across timelines, time zones. You're constantly at rallies and shouting and roaring. It is grueling physically. I've read enough American presidential autobiographies to know that it's one of the hardest campaign trails there is. And so if you are saying that somebody needs to be not have a cold, not tired, not this, not that, in order to have their full faculties about them in a debate, what you're looking at is an inevitability to the fact that this campaign is going to be really hard on him, and there's going to be more and more and more gaffes. Everything's filmed. He's going to be seen confused. He's going to have another debate. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. I don't see it doing anything but getting much worse than his performance in the debate. He's not going to show up like some kind of sharp, straight shooter all of a sudden. That's not going to happen. So now, with everybody watching, it's going to get worse. And I think that's a big problem, because it's all very well, like, you're right in saying, like, there are people in the Republicans, like Rubio, who said that Trump is insane and he's this and he's that or whatever. But the insanity, I mean, like, and I appreciate that there's people who'll be shouting at their and like arguing that it has, but the insanity hasn't been established. Like, as in, these people are, if people like Nancy Pelosi are circling, like they're going to peck him to death, and then they withdraw and say, actually, no, he's the best candidate we have. He's the best man for the job. Then they're really quickly going to start getting blamed if he gets worse and worse and worse. It's not quite the same thing. Do you know what I mean?
So what you're saying is it's easier to withdraw a political charge, i.e. one that's made as a political attack. So this guy's crooked, for example. You can pull that back easier than you can pull back, actually, I don't think he's senile at all anymore.
Yeah, and especially when medically it seems highly unlikely, or at least improbable, that he's just going to suddenly find his focus and find his ability. So it's only going to go one way. And as he gets worse, and every time, we'll just take Nancy Pelosi, for example, and every time that he has a gaffe or a worse or a fall or a whatever confused moment, they're going to be back to her. Do you still? She's going to have to tie herself to this. George Clooney, have you still changed your mind? You still think he's okay? And now all of a sudden their reputation is tied up with a medical situation that they're not qualified to, or not, in any control over. I think at face value it looks like the same thing, but I think that degenerative diseases of the brain, cognitive issues like this, they don't get better, and it'd be a very brave person who put themselves and their reputation in line or tie themselves to that, because you can't.
Yeah. One thing I've been very impressed with, Sarah, is Donald Trump. And people say I'm a Trump hater. And I go on, I'm not a Donald Trump fan. I never have been. And I think at this stage it's highly unlikely I ever will be. But I've been very impressed with him for shutting up and saying absolutely nothing, which is entirely the correct play. He's just gotten out of the way, and he's let this entire psychodrama play out. And I think the Republican convention is in about 10 days, and sometime between now and then he'll announce presumably a nice, safe, conservative in the non-political sense, like safe pick to be his vice president. And then if the Republicans are smart, they'll have him read a really boring speech from the Republican convention and just try and appear like grandpa normal, which is highly unlikely because it's Donald Trump. But that's what he's been doing so far, and it's been working for him.
But that never happened before, so I'm quite shocked because I didn't think he had it in him. What do you think has changed that's made, has somebody been able to finally tame him, or do you think he's just smart enough to know when to shut up?
So I think one of the best things to happen to Donald Trump in his adult life in terms of his involvement in this particular election campaign was the fact that he got kicked off Twitter in 2020. Or 2021, after that election, after the whole January the 6th fiasco. Remember, they banned him from Twitter?
Yeah.
And then he went away and he decided, well, I'm going to set up my own Twitter called Truth Social, and I'm only going to post on that. And of course, all the Trump fans, all the hardcore, like, we think Donald Trump might be the second coming of Jesus, those people, they all followed him onto Truth Social, where he truths away all day, morning, noon, and night. But only his own hardcore fans are really watching. If you remember back during his presidency, like, if you were on the internet at all, Trump tweets popped up the morning, noon, and night. And it was always particularly bad in the early morning because he might have woken up at 3 o'clock and had a cranky thought and decided to tweet it out and be mad. But I think the fact that he's not on that platform means that his thoughts are being more filtered to the average American and the average global citizen than they probably were in either of his other two campaigns. And I think that's helping him. I know Trump fans will be annoyed with me for saying that, but I think that's helping him. The fact that he still has an outlet, it's just that it's not in front of the hundreds of millions of people. He might have tens of millions of people, all of whom like him anyway, reading it.
Yeah, it's possible. But even in his interviews afterwards and like things that he's said just publicly since the debate, he's been quite measured.
Now, speaking of being measured, like he has, and this is of interest for the pro-lifers who are listening, like he has watered down the Republican Party platform significantly on abortion again. Yeah. So it used to say basically that the Republicans were committed to abolishing abortion except in cases of rape, incest, or for a health to the mother. That has now gone to, we are committed to banning late-term abortions, which were by and large illegal under Roe versus Wade anyway. And I mean, I saw a number of American pro-life leaders sort of complaining about this, the fact that the party platform had been watered down. But I mean, I think they're smart enough to know that there's no point complaining because at this point, with an election on the line, Trump supporters, many of them who are pro-life themselves, are just going to go, shut up, we need to win the election. Doesn't matter what we do. But I think it's worth noting. I mean, on policy, he keeps making the Republican Party more moderate, not more conservative, not more nationalist, not more right-wing. They're constantly becoming more moderate on policy. It's just that a lot of people are really happy with Trump's tone because he sounds angry and he sounds mad. And so long as he says moderate things while sounding really angry, that's the formula, which is unusual because the old political formula used to be the reverse. It used to be that you'd sound really angry while saying, sorry, you'd sound really moderate while saying quite radical things. Donald Trump has taken it the opposite way. He's now sounding really radical while saying really moderate things.
Well, it's working.
It's working. I'm just not sure. I think the thing is, if you're talking about winning an election, yes, then it's working. But I mean, I'm not convinced that he's going to be the most, that he's ever been the most radically. I mean, when he left office after 4 years, was the American left stronger or weaker? I would argue they were immeasurably stronger. And I think the left will be stronger after 4 more years of Donald Trump, not really taking apart their institutions, but instead just making the odd statement. It's always been my criticism of Donald Trump, that he doesn't get things done in a meaningful way, which, is something that we can talk about at length another time. But I just think that's the biggest problem with him.
Well, I mean, let's see how the next while goes. I mean, in as much as Joe Biden can further come off the rails between now and polling day, so can Donald. So let's see.
Anyway, I was struck actually, I just to finish that thought about Trump, but take it into another context. I was struck by, did you see the speech that the former UK Home Secretary made in Washington this week? I can't remember the lady's name. She's the Asian lady who was Home Secretary of the United Kingdom for a while, but she basically went to Washington and she said, look, I was Home Secretary for 5 years or however long it was, and I wasn't able to get a pride flag taken down off public buildings because the civil service were against me. And basically, as Conservatives for 14 years, we accomplished nothing. And that's why we lost. I thought it was a really interesting speech, whether you agree with her or not. Did you hear it? Suella Braverman, that's her name.
No, I didn't actually. But basically,
but I just think there's a lot to be.
Conservative values is why they lost.
Yes. Well, not actually doing anything. And I thought it was really interesting because one of the things we mentioned at the start of the show that I was overseas. One of the things that struck me coming back into Ireland this week was, I mean, I in the last 2 weeks I was in Portugal, I was in Poland, I was in Ukraine, and I didn't see a rainbow flag anywhere. Not once, not anywhere, even though it's Pride Month internationally as well as it is nationally. And then I arrived into Dublin Airport, and literally the whole walkway from you get off the plane to go to passport control, there's rainbow flags everywhere. It's like this is the country's national religion and you can't miss it. And you go out through the double doors of Dublin Airport, going out to the car park, rainbow flags on the doors that open before you. And Suella Braverman was making this point that, the Tories were in power in the UK while this agenda was imposed on Britain, and they didn't even try to do anything about it, and that's why they lost. And I think there was a big part of big part of that is true. If you look at the vote, it didn't go to the Labour Party; it went to Nigel Farage. The Labour Party stood still from the last election and won by default.
Yeah, I mean, I think all losses are complicated and have a lot of layers, but I think that there's a constituency of people exists in Ireland as well who would be probably not like to be described as conservative, but have a more conservative leaning view on some of the issues, and they don't feel like they're represented at all. And when they're not spoken up for, they either go to somewhere like, maybe Nigel Farage, or they're lost. They don't know who to vote for. And I think that exists here as well. I think that the pride thing, though, when you're talking about it, I definitely saw some flags, but did you not feel like it was kind of toned down this year compared to other years?
It may have been, but not in the airport and not in a lot of sort of official institutions. And do you know what? I kind of get it because for years I would have been one of those people whose attitude to all this sort of stuff would have been, because I genuinely, I mean, I know it's the oldest cliche in the book, but I've got quite a few gay and lesbian friends, and more power to them. Go and live your life. I have no issue with any of that sort of stuff. I do, however, have an increasing issue with the way this flag has become kind of an alternative national symbol. Like the airport in particular, it's just you can't miss it. It's from you get off the plane till you get on the bus on the other side or go to the car park on the other side. It is everywhere. You've got Garda cars painted in it. You've got Dublin buses, and maybe it's not as bad as it was in other years. I take that point, but it's still pretty bad, and it makes me wonder, like, why does no other group in society get this treatment? Why is it just that flag that flies, in every school, above every building, every government building, every county council? Why is it on every pin in every workplace that people have to wear during various times of the year? Like, and I do feel like it is. There are a lot of people out there who feel similarly to me about it, but a lot of people are still, scared to ask those questions or feel homophobic for raising the issue. So I thought it was interesting that Suella Braverman cited that specific example as a reason why the Conservative Party had lost, because she felt it was no longer willing to ask questions like that Conservatives exist to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you in the sense that, like, I find it a lot of the time when you see it, it's like, why is it here? Why is it in children's hospitals? Why is it on, you know what I mean? Like, why is it on a hospital at all? Is the hospital not for sick people? Like, why does the sexual orientation of a group of people in society have to be so everywhere? You know? And I think I definitely have noticed, one thing I've noticed is that an increasing number of people who are gay, who are uncomfortable with Pride, who feel like it's been taken over, who think that it's, kind of crass, it's in your face, they don't like it, and, who feel like they don't need special treatment for their sexuality. They feel like they're accepted and, they don't need this. So I think that there's elements of that entire Pride movement that's been taken over by people at one end of the flag, and that they're not actually representative of a lot of gay people anymore, which is an interesting, weird development, but it is what it is. I've definitely noticed an increase in that.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience of people who just don't want to get involved in that Pride, the Pride industry anymore, so to speak. But it's just fascinating. Anyway, we'll finish by mentioning our old friend Ebon Joseph, who I think we talked about at length last week. But you were telling me earlier she said something this week that all her friends are racist or something like that. What was it she said?
She said, hold on a second. Because, if nothing, I mean, while on the one hand I object to my tax money being sent to her, we are getting some laughs. So she said there's an idea that racists are nasty people, but these people are our neighbours, colleagues, brothers and sisters. All right. So, your brothers and sisters and neighbours and colleagues. It's so patronising. It's funny. It's like, oh, you don't realise racists are actually everyone, and everyone is racist.
It's a strange message though, because I mean, there's this idea that racists are nasty people. I mean, I would think they are.
Yeah, of course.
I would think that if you are somebody out there who genuinely looks at somebody and sees the color of their skin and goes, I don't like that person because of the color of their skin, which is the definition of a racist, I would say that makes you not a very nice person at all. Whereas I think Ebon is more thinking of...
Yeah, it's broadening the spectrum of what racist is, because this person has an interest in finding racism everywhere, as we've discussed. So if you broaden the criteria or what defines a racist to include, and I've said this before on the podcast, people who have no idea, so your unconscious bias. So it's not enough that you're not racist. You don't care. In your heart and soul that when you see people of different races, you're not, against them, or you don't hate them or whatever. So you can't, that's not enough. It's not enough to be able to self-rule out that you're a racist. Now you have to grapple with your unconscious bias, which is the part of you you're unaware of also being racist. And now that's being extended to other people. So it's not enough that you've never heard your dad or your brother or your sister or whatever being a racist. Now they might be, and they can still be nice people, but they're also a racist. And I think it's just more evidence of the fact that there's a movement to, broaden the definition of racist such that it includes as many people as possible, because the more racist the better, because that keeps people like these in jobs.
despite all of this, Fine Gael are on 24% in the opinion polls, going up. And as we said, if you believe the numbers, the government is on course for re-election. So what are we to do? All we can do, Sarah, is talk about it, which we have done for another hour, for another week. And as we always say, if you join us and you like listening to us because we make you feel like you're not alone, I think that works both ways. I think the fact that we know you're listening makes Sarah and I feel like we're not alone in feeling the way we do about a lot of issues that are happening in the country. So as I said, this time next week, you'll get to look at us and laugh at our faces. I'm a little bit sunburnt, so hopefully that'll have gone down by then. Yeah, that was another issue of the week that really was. From Sarah and from me, we'll chat to you next week.